Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day two of Athena Hack. I am very excited to be joined by Rachel Clancy, who is going to give you an overview of playable experience and gamification. So, Rachel, do you want to take it away?
Thanks very much, Alex. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to load up my presentation, and I wanted to ask in the chat if people wanted to share their backgrounds. Are you students? What are you studying? Are you coming from work? Are you UX? Are you programming? Just so I can get a bit of a feel of like who is attending and what kind of skills we've got in the room. So I'm going to go live. Have a little coffee and tea icon because it's early in the morning and I hope we're all suitably caffeinated. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. I'm going to talk about a game that I'm working on at the moment called Hero's Guide. Then we're going to get into a little bit of background on games and play, and then we're going to introduce the brief for the workshop. So the plan is that I'm going to introduce the brief to you, and then you're going to all go away in your own time to have a little bit of a think of it. And then at 5 o'clock, we're hopefully going to come back together and do a little show and tell and share what we've come up with the group. So my name is Rachel Clancy. I'm a creative at an advertising agency called Wyden & Kennedy. And in 2019, I took a year out of work to study a master's in independent game design and playable experience. In my job as a creative, basically my role is to come up with the initial concepts for advertising campaigns, and then we go on to work with film directors and animators and illustrators and actors and voiceover artists and musicians and composers to go and put these films or print campaigns or radio campaigns or Spotify ads together. And I love this line of work because I get a window into all these different creative disciplines, and I love that variety. And that was something that really attracted me to working in games. This is like a little snapshot overview of some of the things I touched on during my master's. So we looked at things like physical computing, we looked at 3D modeling, VR, and we also made lots of these little quick, easy, rough games, which we'd call trash games, which are great for just kind of hacking something together, getting it in the hands of players and not being too precious about it and just trial and erroring to see what fits. And I think that's a really core aspect of game design, is that it's really user focused, and that we always say play test early, play test often. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're designing any kind of experience that needs to be in the hands of a user. So I wanted to talk first a little bit about the project I'm currently working on, which is called The Hero's Guide to Gardening. And I wanted to share this story with you because I think as someone who's moved from creative into the world of game design, I always wondered, how do people get projects made? Like, where does funding come from? I have all these ideas, but I don't actually know how to get them produced or get them built, and my technical skills aren't fantastic. So how can I, as someone who comes from more of a creative background, actually get a project into development? And so this all got started while I was studying in 2019 at Global Games Jam, which is another hackathon. It's a 48-hour game jam where participants were putting together a game around the theme of home. And I went along with my girlfriend Ida, and we made this little text adventure game called Get Closer. And in the game, you are talking to this little frog character who effectively is depressed. And we wanted the game to explore misconceptions around talking to someone with depression. Like, for example, it might seem like the sensible thing to tell someone who is demotivated and down and won't get out of the house to, you have to shake things off and, snap yourself out of it. But when you understand depression, you know that having your motivation zapped is a big part of the experience of depression. And so we wanted to try and look at things that might intuitively seem like the kind, compassionate thing to say, but maybe aren't quite right when you actually understand a bit more about what depression is. And so really simple, was built in Dreamweaver. It's a HTML game. And again, coming from a creative background, it's not the most excellent technical prowess. This is the dialogue branch system that I put together in Adobe Illustrator. And I think for a game that has something like 4 to 6 branches of choices you can make. We had to write 81 endings, and so it was a complete nightmare to try and cobble this thing together in 48 hours. But we managed to pull it together, and we also built this little casing for it. In games, you talk a lot about embodiment, which is the physicality of playing a game and how through changing your physical situation, you can also add a layer of context to the game. So we wanted to kind of create this experience where to talk to the frog, you have to get down on the frog's level as a way of inferring how when you're speaking to someone who might be going through a mental health problem that you need to try and change your perspective and see things from their perspective. So the game won the judges selection at the hackathon, and from there we were like, oh, maybe that's, that's a cute little idea. We should put it up online. So we uploaded it to Itch, and it's still there if any of you want to see it in all of its lovely simplicity. And we were invited to show the game at EGX Res in 2019, and we showed it in Rock Paper Shotgun's alternative controller room because it's kind of an unusual little setup. And while we were there, we got this lovely write-up from Brendan Caldwell, who said that he punched a man and chatted to a sad frog in Res's RPS room. And also while we were there, we met an organization called Gaming the Mind, who are a group of mental health professionals who are really interested in the intersection between gaming and mental health. And they said that there's the kernel of an interesting idea in there for a game that helps kids develop their emotional literacy, which is our ability to articulate how we're feeling. So kind of thinking that there might be something in this idea, I packaged the game as kind of a playable prototype, and I submitted it for the Sky's Women in Technology Scholarship. And I received funding to develop the game into a more complete experience. And the local newspaper gave me the title of Techno Wizard, which will tell you how much technical savvy the people at the Limerick Post have about these sort of things. And that's a picture of me speaking at a panel at EGX in 2020 with Sachin from Gaming the Mind. So after meeting him the year previous, it came full circle. I ended up speaking on his panel at the following year's Game Festival. So with the funding from the Sky Scholarship, I founded a very small 2-person game studio called Teen Creature Studios. And we're creating games that teach young players to talk about and take care of their mental health. The situation for kids' mental health has not been great historically in the UK. Back in 2018, 1 in 8 children in the UK were reporting a mental health issue. And now we're basing this data from the Children's Commissioner report saying that children in the UK are the least happy they've been in a decade. And this was all pre-lockdown. And as you can imagine, the situation is only getting worse. And so that's kind of the background of where we got to with putting together this game called Hero's Guide. And it's an interactive narrative game for kids 10 to 12 designed to help players develop their emotional literacy and begin a conversation about positive mental health. So this is the initial planning stages of the game, and this is what we would call a paper prototype. So we plotted this game out on a big roll of paper, kind of scene by scene. The man standing next to me is our narrative designer. He is a teacher and curriculum designer called Jefferson Toll. And together we plotted out kind of what are the beats of the story, what content do we want to touch on, how do we want to articulate the different chapters of the story, and popped it all down on paper and then started making some really kind of rudimentary wireframes to go along with it. So this is a close-up as we start to flesh out these designs a little bit more. And these drawings are by my girlfriend Ida, who is the long-suffering and only art director and illustrator for the project. So from these sketches starting to develop the characters a little bit more, starting to get into digital drawing. And then the game takes the form of this kind of interactive comic book where the player can read and scroll or swipe through. And there are interactive animations, and there are also dialogue sections. So we have hundreds and hundreds of these reaction faces as you speak to the different characters. We have just really simple little reactions. So this is a overview of Grace's chapter. Grace is the character who represents anger. And so altogether, this is kind of what her story looks like laid out flat. And then each of the main characters that you meet, there's Grace the Bat, and she represents anger. There's Oriel the Tarsier, and she represents fear. And there's Cosmo the Frog, who represents sadness. And similar to Get Closer, you have 2 conversations with each of the characters. The first one is, again, playing with those misconceptions around that feeling. And the second one is kind of a model for better ways of talking, and we provide dialogue options so that players can kind of reason through what do they think is better or worse, or just alternative ways of phrasing different things, so they can kind of role play through having these conversations. And we also have these sort of playable metaphor sections for dealing with the different feelings. So Oriel, she represents fear and kind of anxiety. We don't directly label it because when we were speaking to Gaming the Mind, they advised us that things like depression, anxiety, and conflict disorders are conditions that people get diagnosed with, whereas fear, anger, and sadness are universal. So rather than kind of writing them specifically to disorders, we kind of kept it more broadly to feelings. So Oriel, her story is all about being afraid, and her garden is being overrun by these things called jitterweeds. And in her first mini game, she's trying to pull them out, and every time she pulls one out, 2 more pop up in its place. And it's kind of a bit of a play on how when you try to kind of forcefully remove the things that you're worrying about, it's just really kind of feeding into that fear. And her story is all about kind of learning to shift her focus away from the things that are worrying her and focusing on the other good things that she has in her garden. So acknowledging that fear is part of a healthy ecosystem, but it shouldn't become overwhelming for you. And so that is kind of where we are at with the game at the moment. We are in the final phases of kind of polishing and playtesting and refining, and we're sending test links out to people to kind of get their feedback and see what's working, what's not working. And yeah, so we're hoping to launch next month for Mental Health Awareness Month in May. But that is all I think I'm going to say for now about Hero's Guide. And next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the subject of this workshop, which is gamification. So first of all, we have to answer the question, what is a game? When I started my master's, I was really lucky because there was this excellent exhibition in the V&A on video games, and each of these titles had a huge exhibit kind of talking about all of the interesting things that went into making them. Like, for example, Splatoon, they worked with a fashion designer to create kind of the costumes that the characters wear, and there's this wonderfully rich kind of graphic world that belongs to the game. No Man's Sky is a procedurally generated game where you travel to different planets, and the development story of this game is something that I think would like soothe the heart of any programmer or game designer, because it was such an embattled process to make it. But in the end, they have done right, and the game is only getting better and better as they release new updates. Journey, beautiful game, quite well known for the way that it does really intuitive user experience design, in that there's really no kind of on-screen text or on-screen prompts. It just does an excellent job of kind of understanding how to intuitively guide the player through the landscape. Bloodborne, I remember they spoke about how they used a full orchestra and choir to compose the soundtrack for the game, and there's some exceptional gothic art design that goes into the world building. The Last of Us has quite sophisticated motion tracking to capture the actors' performance who play the 2 characters, Ellie and Joel, and the rest of the characters in the world. And again, incredible narrative design in that game. It's really like a like playable, fully cinematic experience. And in Minecraft, a very simple building game that has had such enduring popularity, and it's the creativity that people have come out with from such kind of simple rudimentary building blocks. So people building like playable arcade games within the kind of toolkit of Minecraft is incredible. And so the exhibition opens with this quote from Frank Lantz, who is the director of the NYU Game Center, and he said, "Making a game combines everything that's hard about building a bridge with everything that's hard about composing an opera. Games are basically operas made out of bridges." And I think that's a testament to these games that are such a fusion of like the engineering prowess of a game designer and the creativity that comes from all these other disciplines that sort of funnel in to making a game. But that seems quite a grandiose statement when you think about something as simple as Tetris, which is possibly one of the first games people think of when they think of maybe the first game that they played if you're drifting towards middle age the way I am. And so the things that make Tetris a satisfying game to play is it's got this really engaging, tricky, satisfying itch to scratch kind of a puzzle. It's a timed challenge, which kind of ramps up the stress factor, and there's a satisfying difficulty curve. So it's a game that's getting harder to play as you go on. And does this statement still apply? I think it does, because again, there is, like, simple and all as it is, it's the creative flair of taking something that's really programmatically simple, but making it something so like deviously engaging and compelling to play. This is also a game. This is one of Yoko Ono's instruction paintings. Yoko Ono deserves a lot more credit than I think she's given a lot of the time. John Lennon's Imagine takes the format of these pieces of work that made up a big body of her work in the 60s, where she would write these kind of prompts or like kind of surreal, like little pieces of poetry. This one is the sun piece, watch the sun until it becomes a square. And there's dozens and dozens of these, but this is also a game in the fact that it's kind of a mind game. It's sort of a bit of a, like a lateral thinking exercise. And again, there's like a bit of a craft to it. There's a bit of engineering, a bit of creativity. A really simple and ingenious game that was featured in the over 18 section of the V&A exhibit was Queers in Love at the End of the World, which is a game that is played in 15-second bouts. And in those 15 seconds, it's a text adventure game. So you are each time choosing the last actions that you're going to take with your beloved at the end of the world. So it's like, what's the last thing you're going to say to them? What's the last kind of affectionate touch you're going to give them? And the game is running out of time rapidly as you're playing. So it does give you this sort of like frantic sense of urgency as you're kind of rapidly trying to make decisions. And you can just try and speed run through it. And it's just really, really effective way of using very simple mechanics to give you that real feeling and create that kind of embodied experience I was talking about. So I studied a games master, so I'm well soaked in games theory. And so this text by Johann Huizinga, Homo Ludens, kind of one of the seminal pieces on games theory, and he defines games as a voluntary experience freely entered into. It has no purpose beyond the experience. Games are different from our normal lives. They have their own rules and boundaries. Games have their own time and space that are different from normal time and space. Games create order through rules. To violate those rules is to destroy the game. It is impossible to provide a clear, simple definition of a game. Games are culture, so he has already admitted defeat in trying to define what a game is. I think that's the rule. Games create order through rules. To violate those rules is to destroy the game is really interesting, because you think, you know, you play past the parcel and one kid decides to rip off all the layers of the parcel, and that's that game ruined. You try to play solitaire by yourself and you decide to stack all the cards on top of themselves. The game's not going to work. But it's that kind of unspoken contract that makes, you know, like games like Tag or Stuck in the Mud, like you need the rules to make the game enjoyable and to define the boundaries around the game space. So this is a slightly more modern description of games from games theorist Yehuda Berlinger, called The Tenets of New Games. And he writes, play and physicality are as important to adults as to children. Competition and cooperation should coexist, while competition can be important, winning and losing are not. No one should be left out, eliminated, or unable to play. Games are living culture, adapted and changed as required. Games should require little or no equipment. The rules should be dirt simple and fun. Play hard, play fair, nobody hurt. And I think that thought about no one should be left out, eliminated, or unable to play is a really kind of succinct way of thinking about accessibility, and always bearing in mind who does your design intention exclude, who does it include, and who might be left out, eliminated, or unable to play by design constraints you put on the experience you created. So for anyone who is not interested in becoming a game designer, why is any of this interesting? And so the reason I think it's interesting is because we are living in a ludic century, according to Franz Zimmer of Games Lab, MIT. He says that the ludic century is an era of games. When information is put at play, game-like experiences replace linear media. Media and culture in the ludic century is increasingly systemic, modular, customizable, and participatory, and or in other words, interactive, that we expect to be able to interact and impact the media we consume now. So some examples of information at play and how we might see that happening. There are things like serious toys, which are toys designed to deliver educational content. There are serious games, which are games designed to deliver educational content. There's playful design, which are non-toy objects and experiences that use design elements from toys and or are designed to afford playful experiences. And then there's gamification, non-game objects and experiences that use design elements from games. For example, we might have something like Oliver, Ellis and the Artist's stone tools, which are construction tools, which kind of encourage kids to think about building, architecture, physics, engineering, how things work and how they're put together. It's like similar to Lego. It's fun to play with just for the sheer joy and creativity that can come out of putting something together and testing the boundaries of what is and what is not going to fall over. There are serious games like Papers, Please, which is a game that talks about bureaucracy and prejudice in the face of a migration crisis, where you basically play as a border administrator trying to look at people's documents coming into your country, and you're facing your own kind of performance targets, your own trying to support your family, and people are offering you bribes, people are desperate to come in. And it's a game that is really hard to play, and you don't feel any great sense of accomplishment if you effectively kind of like win by the game's rules. But again, it's that embodied experience of trying to get your head into the space of someone who has to actually do that job. There's playful design. This is a social bench by the artist and designer Jeppe Hein, just rethinking what a bench could be and what possibilities are opened up by tweaking the design of a really familiar everyday object. And then there's gamification, which you might see in something like the Nike Run Club, which takes elements from games and applies them to motivating people to run. So I'm going to talk about one or two ideas in designing for play that I think might be relevant to the brief that I'm assigning you today. And the first one is appropriative play and pervasive games. So we talked a little bit when I mentioned Homo Ludens about the boundaries of games and the rules of the game space. And we talk about in game design the idea of the magic circle, which is that once you enter into a game, that you become bound by the rules that define the game space. So I read you this quote. It's a little bit long, but I think it's interesting. All play moves and has had its being within a playground marked off beforehand, either materially or ideally, just as there is no formal distance between play and ritual, so the consecrated spot cannot be formally distinguished from the playground. The arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the court of justice, etc., are all in form and function playgrounds, within which special rules obtain. All are temporary worlds within the ordinary world, dedicated to the performance of an act of art. So an easy way of understanding this might be Pokemon Go, in that through playing the game, the experience overlays our everyday world. And so once you enter into the game space by opening the game on your phone, your commute, your neighborhood, your local park become the world of the game. And there were so many interesting experiences that emerged from the summer of Pokemon Go, where people's everyday lives were transformed by the fact that they were all participating in this game together, and that their everyday world had become a game space. Joyful, simpler times, not anything like the year that we just experienced. This is a very silly, pervasive game, meaning that you can play it. If you live in London, you don't require anything to play it. All that it requires is the existence and knowledge of a building called the Shard. So the Shard game, in its simplest essence, means that if you see the Shard, you die. And this game was kind of coined as a joke about one of London's least favourite eyesores, and a little bit of a commentary on the pollution of the skyline. There's also dark play, which are games that are a bit subversive and that sort of cross the line between what is legal and what is illegal. This is a game that was conceived as a commentary and protest against the surveillance state. So It was created in Montreal, and basically players score points by destroying CCTV cameras and documenting their destruction of the cameras. And again, it's not legal to play. It certainly isn't legal, but again, it is transforming your everyday world into the game space where CCTV cameras become points to be scored. This is a little pervasive mixed reality game that I created during my master's called Screaming for London. I always wanted to have a place within the city that I could just go and scream undisturbed, because I grew up in Ireland, and if you want to go out and just scream your head off in frustration, you can go out into a field and do it, and there's no problem. But here in London, you scream your head off, someone might think they're murdering you. So I created this little module to go inside phone booths that has a kind of audio meter and a little headset that plays messages on a phone tree kind of a thing. And basically you pick up the receiver and the voice says, "Welcome to Screaming for London. To scream about public transport, press 1. Scream about work and education, press 2," and so on and so forth, for about 10 different options. And then you can scream into this little kind of muffler device, and it will rate the intensity of your scream. And I also created a little kind of TFL inspired little website. Again, in an ideal world, we could put these in phone booths all over London, and just mixing the line between our world and the world of the game. And I think that's something quite interesting to think about, perhaps when you guys are coming up with ideas around the circular economy. What objects exist in the real world that you can appropriate or bring into your game world? What can you use that already exists that can draw into your playful experience? So, gamification. This is gamification. Lucy's Mad Skills, which I have the sense this photograph has strongly American energy for Lucy's parents and their enthusiasm for Lucy going pee-pee on a potty. So this is gamification in that it's using a scoring system to motivate Lucy to wash her hands and brush her teeth, providing her an incentivized reward system to learning to use the bathroom. This is also gamification. This is using the inherent human desire to hit targets to try and channel people to throw their trash into a trash can rather than on the ground. And again, out of the two of these, I would argue that this is the better gamified system in terms of the richness of the experience it offers the player. A quite thorough gamified system that I hope many of you might be familiar with is the language learning app Duolingo, with the slightly passive-aggressive owl. I use Duolingo. I am on my way to a 365-day streak because this game is really effective at using certain ideas from games to motivate players. So it does have a pretty simple kind of puzzle challenge playable element in that the challenges are like kind of word games, or they're not supposed to be guessing games, but if you don't know what you're doing and you've kind of advanced beyond your capabilities, that they do become guessing games. So there's a little bit of like an actual playable game aspect. It uses point tracking. It uses streaks because there's something really, really strong in humans that once we start racking things up, once we have that kind of sunk cost fallacy, we do not want to break our streaks. And then there's also a leaderboard, which you have the satisfaction of not only are you doing well, you're also doing better than other people, which is highly compelling, and kind of awards and badges and little things that kind of validate you and motivate you to keep going. So the one thing I would say that Duolingo is possibly missing as a gamified experience is maybe just slightly more inventiveness in the game side of it, but that might be asking a lot, and I think it is doing a lot of things really well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of juice, which is, I guess, a little bit of the place where user experience design and playable experience design or game design kind of come together. And juice is basically all of the like nice animation, graphics, sound, haptic feedback, all of the things that make games feel really satisfying to play. So over here you have basically the kind of statistical data information of what Hanzo's Dragon Strike attack looks like. And then here I have it in the GIF. You can't quite hear the sound, but it also has great sound design. What it actually transforms into when you see the attack in effect. And so Juice not only like makes the game feel great to play and just like delights all of our senses, it also provides feedback so that the player knows when they're doing the right thing, doing the wrong thing. Negative feedback is as important as positive feedback. How do you show the player when they're running up against the edges of an experience, or they're doing the wrong thing or going the wrong way? And so these are some different juicy examples from a couple of different games like Splatoon. You see like the reactions when the player fires their weapon. You have Watam, which is a really interesting game in that there's like it's really explorative. It's not necessarily a clear kind of linear goal of what you're supposed to be doing. It's real about experimentation and putting different objects in the game together. Untitled Goose Game, which is a really popular game that came out in I think maybe the year before last, and where you play as kind of an amoral goose. And that game, simple and all as it looks, it does have its own juice. It has wonderful music, it has wonderful goose sound design, little particle effect systems. And so yeah, so the game Juice isn't just for kind of like hard-hitting, heavy action games that have explosions. It's also for something as simple as a goose. And we also see Juice in the world of user experience design, and we see it a lot on social media, where we see these kind of lightly gamified systems. Again, like Duolingo, they're taking things like scores, point tracking. Effectively, social media is a bit like a leaderboard with everyone you know in terms of who's racking up the most likes. And there's been a lot of conversation around last year, the film The Social Dilemma came out talking about random ratio rewards, in the fact that every time you open up a social media app on your phone, you don't know if you're going to have 10 likes, you don't know if you're going to have 2 likes, you don't know if you're going to have 0 likes. And that kind of casino slot machine mechanic in your mind, again, is really compelling and quite addictive, and that it's not necessarily doing us any good. It's not something that really is making us feel better about ourselves or feeling more connected to the people we interact with. So that's a really important question to ask about what you're doing when you're creating a gamified system. Are you doing something that is going to like enhance the life of the user, or are you just trying to extract money for them? Are you just trying to keep them on your platform as long as possible? Something like Duolingo, it's free to use, and you feel like it gives back what it takes from you. So I feel good about using an app like that. But when I go on Facebook, I don't necessarily feel as great about kind of the exchange of like my time and energy and attention and eyeballs versus what I'm getting back. So that's, I think, really like people ask like, oh, is gamification a good thing or a bad thing? And it's like, is UX a good thing or a bad thing? It's a tool that can be used and understood, and whether it's good or bad really depends on what you're using it in service for. So I hope as we're going forward and we're talking about gamified experiences to do with the circular economy, that we are using gamification for the power of good. Which brings me to the brief. I would like you all to think about a way to use play to encourage your peers to engage in the circular economy. So I have provided, I'm just going to skip down to it. I have a little write-up of this brief that Alex and I are going to share out on the Discord later. It's just like a little bit of a breakdown, and I'm sure at this point you guys are probably well aware of ideas around the circular economy, but just it's kind of some little thought starters. For example, talking about food waste, talking about waste in the clothing and textile industry, electronic waste, energy waste, water waste. What can you do to get people thinking about this problem and working to solve this problem using some ideas or some playful experience design? So I just have a couple of little examples. So back to get behind social benches, which is an idea that I don't know how it's going to evolve in our kind of new world of social distancing. But these benches, effectively, their goal is to hopefully kind of provoke people to talk to each other and kind of their design. I actually have had a playful experience on one of these benches because they're kind of angled towards each other, or that they kind of sink down in the middle so you slide together. That actually, and they do kind of provoke conversation, and I have kind of ended up chatting to strangers while sitting on some of the social benches that you'll find around South Bank in London. So the goal is to kind of provoke interaction and kind of get people thinking differently about the urban space. And he did that by effectively turning the benches into kind of a little theme park ride slide situation. These are two more of Yoko Ono's instruction paintings. And this is not intended to be a really technical workshop. So if your idea is something like a written prompt, then for this workshop, that's absolutely fine, because this is all about just kind of getting your brains thinking about different ways to approach the circular economy, and that might be something that feeds into your main idea for the hackathon this week. So two of her snow pieces, and just kind of read one of them. Drinking Piece for Orchestra. Imagine letting a goldfish swim across the sky. Let it swim from the west to the east. Drink a liter of water. Imagine letting a goldfish swim across the sky. Let it swim from east to west. What is the point of these? Just to have a lovely, reflective time thinking about being alive, I think. This one is called Maneater, and it's a super simple game. It's played with just 2 stickers. One has the instructions and one has this little Maneater sticker. And by using forced perspective, you cover one eye, and as the bus drives, it will kind of come in contact with people's heads. So as by moving your head, you can make the Maneater bite off the heads of pedestrians and cyclists, and you can rack up points the more that you eat. And the purpose of this game is just to give people something fun to do while they're commuting. So again, super simple, 2 stickers, that's all it takes. These are a series of games for urban explorers from a project that was intended to help people get to know and engage with the neighborhood that they live in. And so each of these are really interesting to take as examples of different prompts. For example, the pavement is lava. As you walk, imagine that you are 3 inches tall and that the pavement is the pavement is lava. 3-inch you must go where you're going without ever touching the pavement. Track where you would have to climb, balance, leap, and swing, make sure not to fall in. So again, just making you think about your urban environment in a different way, but also it might help you prompt you to think about what your urban environment might be like to experience for someone with mobility issues, for someone who might need to walk with a cane, or might need to use a wheelchair, might be pushing a pram, it's like for cyclists. So each of these, they're very fun and lateral, but at the same time, there's also kind of interesting kernels of idea of how do other people who aren't me experience this environment that we live in. And this is a basketball court that was recovered by a design company called Pigalle. And I think this one, it was already kind of a playful space, a gameful space. I think the thing that attracted me to it was again just this idea of like looking at what's already out there in your environment. By turning the basketball court into the space, it's still usable as a basketball court, but now it also kind of opens the space up to other activities as a kind of a creative space as well. And I think, yeah, just that's a really useful tool in thinking about gamified systems, is looking at the infrastructure that's already at your disposal and what you can do with it. So in terms of deliverables, we would like to see a paper prototype of your design to share with the group at 5 o'clock, and just want them to be super quick and super easy. And the reason why we're asking you to do paper prototypes is not so much because we want to see your drawing skills or your draftsmanship or your wireframing skills. It's more so because the act of trying to put it down into paper helps you sharpen your thinking in terms of what is necessary, what is useful, and what do I need to get this idea across, and how does it actually work? Because sometimes if it was just kind of like an oral presentation back to the group, the little nuts and bolts you might not have worked out so well. And we're not expecting high levels of juice in this, but if there are parts of your design where a little bit of feedback would be useful or would help kind of inform the usability of the idea, then that would be fantastic to see as well. I have a really simple little example that came from a workshop I did at UAL year before last, and their brief was again how to get new students familiar with the area when they are coming in as part of their Freshers Week. And what they came out with was this kind of scavenger hunt interactive map where throughout Peckham there are these points that the students need to find, for example, the bookshop, Frank's Cafe, Peckham Levels, UIL Square, Student Union. And at each of the points, there are these little challenges that will help encourage the students to get to know the local area and also get to know each other. So really simple idea, but the prompts were written thoughtfully. For example, like you're going to Frank's Cafe and the prompt is order something you've never tried before. So you kind of get to know the business, you get to try something new. Another one, take a picture with 3 other students. Like hopefully you'll be meeting your other teammates at the SU's welcome wall. So all of it really simple, but quite thoughtful in terms of what the desired outcome is for the people who are participating. And this level of simplicity is really what we're looking for. Like I made this in Google Slides, but a pen and paper drawing is also perfect. Let me see, is there anything else? Yeah, and we're, I think the plan is we're going to open this up on the Discord channel. Hopefully we're going to invite people to kind of send us their work ahead of time, and then that way we can compile it all into a deck and share it back to the group. And I think, yes, so I'm going to share this little brief with you all. It's got some, on the following page, it's got some kind of inspiration and thought starters. You're not expecting anyone to watch any of it today, but it's also just like a handy document to refer back to just for further reading. And some stuff I think is really cool. One of them is the second episode of the second season of the show Abstract on Netflix with a game designer who, again, she just is so passionate about her work, and it's really inspiring and wonderful to watch. If anyone has any questions about what we're going to be doing, we've got plenty of time to ask. And if anyone is interested in following the project, we are Tea Creature Studios on Instagram, at Tea Creatures on Twitter. I have not done much with the Twitter. Please do not be disheartened by the fact that there's sweet effect on there at the moment. And our website is Tea Creature Studios. We are looking for playtesters at the moment. So if anyone out there has an iPad or an iOS device, please do get in touch on any of our social media platforms, and I'd love to send out a test link and I can share a little bit of our work in progress. But I think that is everything from me.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Yeah, that was amazing. I kind of said in our Discord when I shared the session this morning that whilst we were biased, we were very excited for today, and I think yeah, kicked it off beautifully there with that gamification session. I think we'll kind of just wait for a few questions, but I think just a super quick one from me, I guess would kind of be one piece of advice. So obviously, you've kind of given a great 45-minute overview, but for those that are thinking of creating a game, obviously you've been in the mindset you've created. Is the one kind of sole piece of advice you think if you follow this, you'll kind of be fine, or it's a great place to start?
Well, I mean, there's within that question, there's so many sub
But
questions. But I think on the side of I am coming to Athena Hackathon, I've seen this presentation, and now I would like to try a gamified experience as my solution for the hack. I would recommend looking at platforms that let you get up and running really quickly with game design. Like Unity is super user friendly if you have kind of any bit of programming knowledge. It's really easy to get started with. Twine is really popular as a way of designing branch narratives if you want to include something like that in your game. It was actually the foundation for the Black Mirror episode Bandersnatch. Charlie Brooker used Twine to kind of initially plan out the branch narrative, and then apparently he broke it and they had to go and make him his own version of Twine. And I think I think this is true for anything, is just paper plan first, figure out what you're doing on paper, what needs to go where, scope realistically. Like this little game that we made for Heroes Guide, we thought we were scoping realistically. We thought we were keeping it really, just it is what it is. We're not adding any extra like we tried to keep the dialogues as short as possible. We tried to make the artwork as simple as possible, but it's still taken us effectively like 2 years to make what we thought we were going to get done in about 3 months. Yeah, so I think you can never be too realistic with what you intend to get done in the time limit you have.
That is, yeah, a great piece of advice all round, I think, not just for game making.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there don't seem to be kind of any questions streaming through on the YouTube. So I think, as you kind of mentioned during your talk there, Rachel, we'll create a channel on our Discord for those that have attended today. Feel free to get any questions in if you think of any when you're kind of doing your paper prototypes. We'll invite Rachel to the Discord so you can ask her kind of personally. But yeah, we look forward to the session later today. I've shared the link in the chat. I'll share it again now, just so that everyone has it for the call later. But again, that will be on Discord. But
Perfect. I
yeah,
think it's like last thing I wanted to say as well that this is a hackathon for women and non-binary people. I'm a cisgender woman. My partner Ida is a non-binary person, and and also I grew up in Limerick in Ireland, which isn't exactly like a tech capital of the world. And for me, I think I was always preoccupied with like how does stuff get made? Like how do people get all these wonderful opportunities that I'm seeing my peers have who live in different places? And what I've realized is that it's really about taking part and getting involved in the community. Like if we hadn't if we hadn't gone to the game jam, we wouldn't have been able to make Heroes Guide. If we hadn't met the guys from Gaming the Mind at that gaming festival, we wouldn't have even realized that there was a good idea in it. So it's just like it's taking part and it's getting to talk to other people and it's finding communities like this and finding events and getting to know people. Because again, like you're here to just make friends and have a good time and enjoy the hackathon, but you're also effectively meeting other people who do the same thing that you do and that you're interested in. And you never know down the line whose brain you might want to pick about an idea you have. So yeah, that if you're doing this and you're coming to the hackathon, you're well on your way.
well, I think that is the perfect ending. I don't think I can add anything to that to make it any better. So yeah, thank you. There's a lot of thanks in the comments. So again, Rachel, just
Cheers.
yeah, amazing talk. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. And we look forward to seeing you later on. Bye.